It is the appointed time and the quorum is formed. I call to order the meeting. This is the meeting of the Subcommittee on Improving the Practical Arrangement for Elections under the Panel on Constitutional Affairs. This also marks the last meeting of this subcommittee. Will the Secretariat please invite the Government Administration to come in? In a moment, members who would like to put questions to the official can press the button. I will assign 4 minutes to each member, questions and answers included. If there is still time, you can have a second round. We will first invite Mr. Eric Zhang, Secretary for Constitutional and Mainland Affairs, to brief us on the LC paper CB-2 442-2024-01. Thank you, Chairman. Chairman, as we have stressed numerous times before, to highlight the advantages of the improved electoral system, the government has been working tirelessly with the Electoral Affairs Commission, or the EAC, on how we can further enhance the electioneering arrangements for public elections to ensure that under the premises of transparency, fairness, and honesty, we can enhance the efficiency of the electioneering arrangements and also encourage voters and candidates to participate. In this meeting, we will focus on facilitation measures on declaration of election expenses and election donations, submission of election advertisements or EAs, and consent of support, appointment of agents and digitalized services to facilitate candidates. During our review process, we have taken stock of past experience and listened to feedback so that we can continue to enhance the electioneering arrangements and enhance the efficiency. Now, considering the heavy workload on candidates, the REO has already launched facilitation measures so that in filling out the election return, the task would be easier, and also the deadlines for submitting election advertisements and consent forms have been relaxed so that candidates have more time to prepare them. The REO will continue to enhance the relevant e-platforms and also adopt faster payment system to speed up the entire workflow. And also, we will continue to provide maximized facilitation for candidates and consider various adjustments. For example, adjusting the threshold for election donations upward and also further relaxing the submission deadline of EAs so that candidates can have more time to file the forms and appoint agents. Besides these enhancement measures, the CMAB will continue to work with the EAC and the REO to identify rooms for adopting INT measures in voter registration, voting, polling, and vote counting. Election is very important concerning the good governance of Hong Kong, as well as the principle of patriots administrating Hong Kong. Now, we will not let our guard down. We will continue to be vigilant in ensuring that elections are conducted in a fair and transparent manner. We will also ensure that the integrity of elections are not compromised, while enhancing the protection on privacy, public confidence, as well as adoption of IT to ensure that the elections are more efficient. Now I will invite my team, Mr. Raymond Wang, to go into the details of the paper and also invite our members to give us more views so that we can continue to enhance our arrangements. Chairman, members, in the following, I shall report to members the relevant electioneering arrangements for public elections and the proposed enhancements. On declaration of election expenses and election donations, each candidate must, within the statutory period after the poll, submit the election return and stipulating all the expenses incurred by the candidates and the agents, as well as donations received. In terms of facilitation measures in completing the election returns, for expenses in relation to publishing election advertisements, we have enhanced the central platform. Candidates can download a spreadsheet containing all particulars of the EAs submitted through the platform after login. Upon filling the relevant EA expenses, candidates could incorporate the spreadsheet as a part of the election return for the consolidated submission. In addition, to ensure that candidates understand clearly how to complete the election return, we have produced a guideline on completion, a short video, and FAQ, which have been uploaded onto the dedicated website for the relevant elections for candidates' reference. We will continue to explore enhancement measures to assist candidates in declaring their election expenses. Concerning the threshold for the amount of election donations warranting issuance of receipts, according to the present law, if an election donation exceeds 1,000 Hong Kong dollars in value, the candidate must issue a receipt to the donor, in which the name and address of the donor must be specified. If an election donation exceeds the existing threshold of $1,000, but the name and address of the donor are unknown, the donation cannot be used as election expenses. Then the candidate must give such a donation to a charitable institution or trust of public character of their choice. The law also stipulates that the election return must be accompanied by a copy of the receipts issued to the donor mentioned above, and a copy of the receipts issued by the charitable institution or trust to the candidate. The purpose of this is to enhance the transparency of election donations, preventing candidates from using election donations for non-election purposes, and to encourage public participation in elections under the premise of ensuring fair elections. Concerning the $1,000 threshold, it is applicable to various public elections. The maximum amounts of election expenses incurred is different. Concerning the threshold and the impact on different elections, we will consider adjusting the threshold in negotiation with the ICAC on how to suitably adjust the threshold for the amount of election donations while honoring the original intent of the threshold and alleviating the workload of candidates in the entire election. On submission of election advertisements, or EA, and consent of support, candidates must submit the EAs and also the relevant documents, including the e-copy or hard copy of the consent form for inspection. In the 2023 District Council ordinary election, in view of candidates' heavy workload in electioneering, the EAC relaxed the submission deadline of EAs and related documents from within 1 working day to within 3 working days after the candidates published the EAs. With the implementation of these relaxation measures, candidates had relatively adequate time to submit their EAs and relevant documents, while the public could also continue their inspection through various channels, maintaining the transparency of EAs. In handling complaints relating to EAs, the returning officers had not identified any abuse concerning EAs. On submission of consents of support, if the EA of a candidate includes the name of a person or the name, logo, or pictorial representation of an organization in such a way that implies the support of that person or organization for the candidate must obtain the written consent of the person or organization before publishing the advertisement. The candidate must also upload the consent of support onto the central platform, the candidate's platform, or make it available to the RO concerned for public inspection within the period of EA submission. In line with the relaxation measures of the submission deadline, the EAC has also relaxed the deadline for submission of the consent of support to within 3 working days after the publication of EAs. We have enhanced the workflow for candidates to upload their EAs and consent form onto the central platform. A reminder to submit the relevant consent of support in compliance with the law will be provided to candidates on the web page. Concerning the appointments of polling agents and counting agents, the existing legislation stipulates that the candidates and the agents must give the relevant notice of appointment to the Chief Electoral Officer or the relevant returning officers at least 7 days before the polling day. For late applications, candidates and the election agents would have to submit the notice of appointment in person to the presiding officers or the returning officers on the polling day. Under the prevailing arrangements, the REO would collate and verify all notices of appointment and then provide candidates with a list of their appointed agents for reference. 1 day prior to the polling day, the latest, we will send the list of candidates and their agents who are allowed to enter each polling station or counting station to the relevant presiding officers or returning officers so that they can verify the identities of the candidates or their agents. Now, this process takes time, but the REO will actively explore the feasibility of suitably shortening the period for submitting notices of appointment so that candidates have more time to make appointments. Concerning digitalized services to facilitate candidates, to better support candidates in submitting the forms, we have set up the REO e-form upload platform for candidates of various elections to upload and submit forms relating to the appointment of various types of agents in elections electronically. Also, candidates can make use of the central platform to upload details of their EAs and the related documents. We will continue to explore the digitalization of more election-related forms, for example, contents of the introduction to candidates, with the aim of fully digitalizing the processing of election-related forms. Now, with the more widespread use of electronic payments method, we are working with the Treasury to make use of the faster payment system to receive election deposits from the candidates so that the process is smoother and faster. I have just reported our enhancement measures on electioneering arrangements. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Raymond Wang. We have in attendance today Mr. Eric Zhang, Secretary for Constitutional and Mainland Affairs. We have also the Chief Electoral Officer and Principal Electoral Officer, as well as the Director of Investigation, Assistant Director and Regional Officer and Chief Investigator from the ICAC. When members ask questions, the relevant officials will answer the questions. We have 4 members that have pressed the request to speak button. I'll read out the order in which members are going to speak. Dr. Tik Chi-yun, Mr. Lee Chen-kung, Mr. Tang Fei, and myself. So 4 minutes per member, questions and answers included. If we have reached the time limit, I'll allow for a second round questions. Thank you. Dr. Tik Chi-yun. Thank you. We can see that with elections, they are fair and they are of integrity. There is still room for improvement, however. And the REO colleague has proposed some very detailed arrangements. I particularly appreciate the relaxation of a deadline for the submission of EAs. We have so much work to do. Within 1 day is simply too strict. And we know there is a lot of information on the internet. If we have to submit the information within 1 working day, that is simply too stringent. And we need more time to update the information and correct any information if necessary. And that does not affect transparency. So I believe the administration has struck a balance. I would like to follow up on the issue of electronic handling arrangements. It is said that in future all the forms will be digitalized. I think we have been doing better, especially in the previous election. Of course, we want to be digitalizing things because we want to be more environmentally friendly and we want to be an international INT hub. We should go paperless to demonstrate that. And I believe the closest election will be that of the Legislative Council. Can you confirm that the next electrical election will be a paperless and fully digital election? Thank you. Secretary. We understand where the member is coming from. And in previous elections, we have confirmed once and for all, elections should be open, fair, and honest. And we can see that these core values are maintained while new elements were introduced to enhance efficiency of elections. We would say that our elections are quite high level and are of high standards. And we have taken into consideration the latest development in technologies. We may have some minor disturbances, but this will not stop us from moving forward. We are very determined. As I said in my opening remarks, we are prudent with our preparations for each election because we know that every election is important. It is about upholding one country and two systems and our good governance. As Dr. Tik said, Hong Kong is a smart city. We should demonstrate that Hong Kong is a smart city so as to maintain that reputation. We have indeed room for improvement though. As I said earlier, we will try to strike a balance, but we are definitely moving forward. We will go digital and paperless. We will definitely try to strive for full electronic submission of forms. Chair, I have a follow-up. I do understand and agree with the direction taken by the administration. I just want the administrations to talk about their stance whether our next election will be fully digital. I believe that will be the case. Thank you. Mr. Lee Chen-kung. Thank you, Chair. I want to ask, for the previous elections, the recent ones, for the cases of complaints received, is it the case that the figure has dropped? Can you answer this question first? Well, for example, For the district council election, the 2019 election, we have received so many less complaints than before. Right, I thought that was the case. This is exactly because the administration has relaxed the deadline to 3 working days. And I believe the figures reflect that. I would like to express my appreciation for the measure, but there is always room for improvement because we have advancements in technologies. I can see in the paper that the administration is very willing to improve in various regards, including with the election deposits, the appointment of agents, as well as the relaxation of the deadline, as mentioned. I do appreciate that. I'm not sure if all of these proposals can be undertaken at the next election. It may not be the case, but if not, I hope that the administration will set priorities. For example, for declarations regarding the submission arrangements, there should be more measures that will facilitate candidates' submission of such documents. And with the digitalization issue, I'm sure you know with certain shopping malls, you can have receipts and then you can have points accumulated. Before you would have to submit the paper receipts, but then now they can be electronically submitted by taking photos of the receipts. And if we look at the different banners or posters, I can just take a photo of that. We don't need to submit the actual documents to the REO. We can submit these through an app, and that will definitely be an important facilitation measure for candidates. I think we can just do it via Google Forms, for example. And we can also have a link for Instagram. Is it possible for us to just provide a link and we do not have to download a template? We do not need to fill in a declaration. Since we already have that link, why do these other things matter? Can the administration answer the question? Okay, something like I am smart, right? Yes, Chair. Secretary, thank you. The suggestion is invaluable. We will definitely try to make use of digital tools. It's not just talk. We are still quite far from the next legislative election, but we are already making preparations. We are already discussing how to enhance our arrangements. We have been liaising with stakeholders. We have listened to their views. We have also drawn reference from election arrangements in the other parts of the world and see what can be applied to our future elections. And I do hope that in future we will be able to introduce even more technologies to our elections to enhance the experience for everyone. The member also mentioned that the complaints figure, and for the complaints figure we answered that the figure has dropped. Before, there were often problems with election submissions, such as those relating to election advertisements, EAs, and consent of support. So we have definitely improved the arrangements. We have talked to the EAC, and the chairman of the EAC would actually specifically discuss this at briefings for candidates and telling them the points to note for the submission arrangements. And our ICAC colleagues have conducted over 100 briefings for outside candidates. They just want to prevent them from doing things that do not conform to the rules. And after these have been done, we do see an improvement with the most recent election. I do not have the figures on hand, but I know that the complaints figure and the number of contraventions have dropped. So we start from the minor details and then we get results. That's the approach that we took. I do value the suggestions made by members because you are users. You have experienced the election process. Your feedback is definitely important to us and we will definitely take them into consideration. Again, I thank you all for your feedback. Chair, I have a very short follow-up. I'm sure all of us have gone through multiple elections, and I think that in the most recent election, we have seen the progress made. I hope that you can just improve what you have already improved. Thank you. Mr. Tang Fei. Thank you. I agree with what was said by other members. We can see that the process is getting much easier for candidates, and in fact I myself breached the rule for the submission of EAs within 1 working day as well. I want to ask about paragraph 5 in particular. It is said that if an election donation exceeds the existing threshold but the name and address of the donor are unknown, the donation cannot be used as election expenses. I do understand that, but it is said after that the candidate must give such a donation to a charitable institution or trust of their choice. But I find this to be quite strange because if they should know the source, and even if they don't, they should call the police. So I want to ask if there is any legal basis for this arrangement that the funds that are unknown should be given to a charitable institution or trust. I think if there is no legal basis for this, we should be prudent. We have many different people who would forward clips or documents or posts on social media. And if they do that, they should inform the candidate or the candidate's team in order to declare the relevant election advertisements. And in reality, we have often faced difficulties because we may not be aware of our friends or relatives doing that. And for those who are new to elections, they may be concerned about this. So can the administration clarify this? Thank you, Mr. Zhang. Or is it someone else who is going to answer the question? Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Mr. Tang Fei, for your questions. In paragraph 5, we are talking about some requirements. That is, if one is receiving funds of an unknown source, or worst case, if it is laundered money. We have other ordinances that pose requirements that if you suspect that is the case, one should call the police. But in paragraph 5, we are just referring to, in general, if there are some omissions in the receipt, or if the donor is anonymous, that they have no reason to suspect it is criminal, then this donation should be given to a charitable institution or trust.
On your second question, now it is very common for users of the social media to repost posts supporting a certain candidate. Now, under the current legislation, even if you are not a relative or friend of the candidate, if I am just a fan of that candidate and I repost a post to support the candidate, it doesn't constitute election advertisements, because that has nothing to do with the behavior of the candidate. It is not directed upon by the candidate, so it is not covered by the EAC ordinance. I invite the ICAC to supplement. Thank you. The second point mentioned by my colleague, reposting election advertisements without the consent of the candidate, then the candidate does not need to report the election expense for that post, unless that is directed upon by the candidate. If the candidate is in no position to stop the friend or relative from doing that, then he or she does not have to report it. Mr. Holden Chow. Thank you, Chairman. I have some views to put forward. I know the government has done a lot. Some of my colleagues mentioned that we should be more user-centric in everything we do. Now, many of our members here are elected members. So in handling election returns, some colleagues told me that they have to report very petty stuff in the election returns, but the REO would deal with these items with discretion. For very, very minor stuff, they would use discretion. So that's the same spirit. You are relaxing the deadline from 1 day prior to the polling day to 3 days. The idea is to make the work of the candidates easier. Now, concerning electioneering and also encouraging voters to come out to vote on the polling day, I think you have done a good job in the previous round of district council election. This is civic education. We are educating people to exercise their civic right by casting a vote. So in the last round of ordinary election, the publicity campaign was really extensive. That's the way to do it. I hope you can keep up this attitude. Third, now this is a well-repeated point by DAB members about voters polling registered. Sometimes the voters would find that the names have been struck off without any reason. Now, sometimes the voters forgot to reply to a letter of inquiry, and then the names have been struck off. Maybe they were too busy and they forgot to reply to the inquiry letter. So, by the same token, would you be more flexible and use discretion on these cases? According to many people in the community, they find it very easy to miss the letter because they fail to reply to the letter in time. Their voters' registration would be struck off. So can you please explain how you handle these for us? Thank you. Mr. Eric Chung. Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Holden Chow, for your very valid points. As mentioned by Mr. Chow about the petty items for report, can we simplify the arrangements? Yes, as I stressed, we have to work on the premise of fairness, transparency, and honesty. So these are the overarching principles. Without these values, there's no point to have the election. So on this premise, we would try to make the electioneering arrangements as candidate and voter friendly as possible. That's why we are seeking to enhance the arrangement. Now, for the petty items mentioned by Mr. Holden Chow, the time is different. Should we stick to the old ways, or can we be more flexible and innovative? So we will review all these. So rest assured, Mr. Holden Chow, we will seek to do better continuously. Concerning publicity campaign, I thank Mr. Holden Chow for acknowledging our work. Please be assured, the previous election is just a benchmark. We will aim higher every time. There is a consensus among society that this is the right way to conduct an election. So we will make it our culture and strive and aim higher. So I hope our members will continue to monitor our work and give us your views. Concerning voters' names being struck off, may I invite my colleague to explain. Thank you, Secretary. We have also heard similar opinions. Concerning cancellation of voters' capacity or voters' identity, we have to operate under the law. Now, besides sending letter by post, we will also try to contact the voter in questions through email and the phone many times. However, the voters are not mandated by the law to provide their phone numbers or email addresses to the REO. So sometimes we have no ways to reach out to the voters. That's why we encourage voters to leave their phone numbers and email addresses with us. This will help the REO to contact them. Now, if you find your name's absent on the preliminary register, there is still a chance for the voters to make a case to the REO and have the name put on. So even if you find your name absent on the register, you can reapply to have your name put on. Well, actually, I'm looking at the I'm Smart app now. You can apply, you can register or even cancel your name on the register. So it is very convenient. Next, Dr. Junius Ho. Thank you, Chairman. Now about election advertisements. Mr. Eric Zhang, I have a question for you. Posting election advertisements on in a shop or outside a shop, let's say a poster. Usually we would seek the consent of the shop owner or the premise owner. I just need a consent for support from the premise owner, and then I can put up my posters on them. And also on the walls of building, we can put up our portraits as election advertisement on the facade of the building. Again, we just need a consent for support. Now, that would be a nominal fee of $1, and that would be counted towards donation. Now, the third scenario, election advertisements on vehicles, public minibuses and franchised buses. You simply have to pay the fleet owners to have your advertisements on them. Now, what about private vehicles owned by your friends? You can put up your posters on the cars of your friends. You won't be charged. You don't even have to pay the nominal fee of $1. But that is also election advertisements. Now, taxi is another story. You have to pay the taxi fleet owners for putting up an advertisement on taxis, and you have to report for the expense, not for the other cases. So this is my experience. In 2015 and 16, I was supported by many people, so I was given a free slot on vehicles to have my portraits put on. I play safe, so I secured a consent of support from them, and I paid a nominal fee of $1, and it counted towards donation. Not donation, actually, expense, election expense. So that's fine in 2015, 16. Then in 2022, I was an election committee member, so again, I adopted the same practice. I submitted the reports. Then ICAC told me there is a value attached to the slot, but I said I was not charged. But they told me you have to consider the commercial value of the slot, $4,000. Oh, I was surprised. I didn't know how it was calculated, and I received a warning letter from the ICAC. I said, how dare you? I think that is entrapment. Of course, I could put up a litigation against ICAC, but what's the rule? If I have to pay the commercial value for that slot, do I have to pay way more than the nominal fee of $1 to the premise owners? I just don't want candidates to be trapped unwittingly. I would avoid discussing individual case here. I'm just quoting my case. I want to talk about the principle. I'm not going to touch upon your individual case. Let's talk about the principle, okay? Secretary and Dr. Junius Ho, thank you. I think there are two concepts at play here. First, about the consent of support. And second, election donation. These are two different concepts. Not donation, but expense. Well, expense is closely related to donation. Now let's talk about consent of support first. If the poster will imply the support of that person or the shop owner for you, then you have to report it. So if you put up a poster on the bus bodies, no one would believe that the bus companies are supporting you, so you don't have to secure a consent of support from the bus company. Now let's move on to election expense. As you have mentioned, Dr. Junius Ho, if you put up a poster on the bus body, and for whatever reason, the bus company charged you a nominal fee of $1, then the guideline is clear. We will not accept the $1 as an actual expense. So we would consider what the usual market value is for letting out that spot on the bus body. Now, the difference between the market value and the $1 you paid would be your election expense. You have to report that election expense as well as the donation. So these are very clear under the guidelines. However, if a friend puts up your poster on his vehicle, and that friend does not ordinarily charge anyone for putting up an advertisement on his car, then there is no market value to speak of. Then we have to consider other factors to arrive at the value of the election donation. ICAC, please.
We got one, Albert.
Again, please do not discuss individual cases. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Dr. Ho. As said, we will not discuss individual cases. But as Freddie said, if a bus or a lorry is rented out for the posting of ads, according to legislation, we have to declare that it is an election expense or an election donation. Chair, I have a follow-up. We're just talking about principles here. For the bodies of vehicles that would have space for posting ads, if you make use of that space, of course, I understand that it would be essentially posting an ad by using that space. So I understand that in general, they would understand that to be a market transaction. But I'm not referring to this. I am talking about a friend who is indeed in the trade, but then and they did not rent out the space for the posting of ads before. So if a candidate posts ads on this vehicle and has asked for a nominal fee of $1 to be paid, in principle, is this acceptable? That is, if the friend is not in the commercial, well, is in the trade but is not doing this commercially. Will you still derive the figure using the market value? So I was charged $4,000, but then on other occasions, it may no longer be the case. I may be charged $40,000. Is there some sort of a gray area that is causing confusion to candidates? Thank you. Administration, please. I'll try to answer the question and then I'll let the ICAC colleagues supplement my answer. Let me give an example for illustration. For example, a friend is an owner and has a shop, and before they would rent out the shop to other people, but they're good friends with you, so they have rented the space out to you for a nominal fee of $1. So how can we derive the actual expense? So we will calculate the market rent of the shop of a similar size, and we will determine the market rent as if the premises are rented out to some other individual. So that is the general principle. I'll let the ICAC colleagues supplement my answer. Thank you. As Freddie said, that is the arrangement adopted. So, for example, a lorry may not have rented its space out before, but if the body of similar vehicles would have market value, For example, if it costs $5,000 normally to rent that space, and they are charging you a nominal fee of $1, we will consider the difference to be an election donation. And my stance is the same as that of Freddie. Chair, perhaps I think we should think about whether the arrangement is reasonable, and there are multiple different scenarios. When it comes to gray area, we would encourage candidates to consult the ICAC, and the ICAC would advise candidates in these areas. Thank you. Well, Mr. Porter, thank you. I'm also a lawyer like Dr. Junius Ho, so let me give some suggestions here. I have reservations about the answer given, for example, for bodies of vehicles, such as those of minibuses. They have market value because they would normally post ads on their bodies. But for posters, usually they are affixed on windows, so they do not necessarily have market value. So I think there is indeed a gray area here, and I don't blame Dr. Junius Ho for being confused. And I guess right now we should deal with the cases on a case-by-case basis. Let me get back to my own questions. I agree with other members that the process is now more user-friendly, and I appreciate the administration's efforts for improving the election arrangements. And I think in general, when there were complaints, there wouldn't be reviewed, but now we can see that reviews have been done right away after the conducting of an election, and we have discussed even the minor details of the election process. So I hope the administration will continue to take this approach and conduct reviews before and after elections. I usually will only criticize things, so I'm not used to giving praises. So I'll now get to my criticisms. In paragraph 6, about the threshold, it is said that because there are different elections, there is no general principle that can be set for the adjusting of the existing threshold. But I'm thinking we can perhaps set a maximum threshold, and then we can set different percentages for different elections, and I think that would facilitate candidates. I want to also talk about complaints. Complaints before were used as weapons to attack competitors. I hope that this is now history. But with the handling of complaints, I wonder if there can be some sort of central handling of complaints instead of going to the police as a last resort. So we have to go to different departments for different issues. Is it possible to have a central handling platform so as to have consistent handling? For example, for issues that are handled by the FEHD, they may not be as active in investigating the issues. So is it possible for us to have a central platform? Also, can the complaints not be anonymous? I think with electioneering, it is often very time pressed. If we are harassed, or if there are complaints of harassment, whether it's real or fake, the reputation of the candidate may be tainted. So we should prevent candidates from being attacked by malicious complaints. Chair, I have a short question after this. Before, the administration said that with the enforcement, they will take a consistent approach, but it seems not to be the case. In fact, with some candidates' breaches, the administration has just allowed them because the candidate has given excuses. They can just leave the invalid flags left there overnight. Can the administration take note of this and make sure enforcement action is taken in a unified manner? Thank you. Secretary, thank you. The suggestions are very much valid. Regarding the donation threshold, I have asked the very same question myself. So why not set a different threshold for each election? Well, of course we can. Say for electrical election we can have one, and for the chief executive election we can have another one. But this will cause a bit of a mess, because in different elections, candidates may be subject to different requirements, and that may cause some confusion. But I think threshold is a very simple concept. It's just an amount. Yes, but for certain elections, for donations of different amounts, they have different arrangements for declarations. So people may be confused as to, for example, they have taken part in a similar election before, but the changes have been implemented, or it is a different election and they are subject to different requirements and they may be confused. I'm not saying that we won't do anything. I think we have to do something, because just considering the amount itself being 1,000, it has not been changed for many years. So I think we need to adjust it. But it's just a matter of how the adjustment is to be made and what kind of adjustment it is. As for the handling of complaints, whether it can be handled in a unified manner and whether the complaints can be not anonymous, we will definitely look into them. We will see if what we can do better, so that with the handling of complaints, we can improve our handling. We do see concerns about enforcement, and we will try to strike a balance between enforcement and awareness of the relevant guidelines and rules. Thank you. Well, it's now my turn to speak. Many members have sung praises of the administration's efforts. And we have the REO and ICAC improving the relevant arrangements. Well, actually, we want to hear more criticisms for us to improve. Well, thank you. But I guess with improved district governance, we want to see improvement with each election, and we want to make sure elections are conducted in an open, fair, and honest manner. Before, when we had serious political conflicts, we had no option but to deal with the trouble caused first before we can think about improvement. Well, I myself was on the advisory committee in relation to election arrangements before, and I have said for vehicles parked illegally, you would issue fixed penalty tickets, and this is very much different from bank robbery. Will you be able to distinguish offenses of a less serious nature than those for in a more serious nature? And regarding this, do you have any figures for the past election about the handling and investigation of complaints to see how many complaints there are and how much the figure has dropped? We do have some REO guidelines for different elections. So can you provide more information to facilitate understanding on what the offenses of a more serious nature are and what offenses are less serious? And that will facilitate the understanding of candidates so that they won't breach the relevant rules inadvertently.
Second question. Mobile phones are very convenient nowadays. Now, candidates may send out the election advertisements via mobile phone, and the cost involved is just minimal. And also, there are volunteers sending out these messages online for the candidate. So, for these minimal costs, under, say, $1, can they be waived? And also, some candidates would apply for using government's land for electioneering purposes. Sometimes there are urgencies. For example, when there is a fire, the candidates will have to set up a street booth for helping out the victims or the affected residents. So there is no time for the candidates to make a report or apply. So for egregious offenses, of course, we have to deal with them seriously. However, for minor incompliances, can we deal with them flexibly? Thank you. Concerning the complaints, may I invite the REO's colleague to answer? Thank you. After the enhancements of the electioneering procedures and also the improvements in the electoral arrangements, the REO has received significantly less complaints during the 2023 election compared with 2019. Various complaints on non-compliances or offenses under the EAO has reduced drastically. Now, election returns and concerning election returns, the REO is still validating the election returns. We are vetting them. In the end, the number of cases in relation to the omission or mistakes made in election returns, we don't have the figure yet, so my apologies. In my experience, the REO would complete the vetting of election returns promptly, but we don't have an answer now. I trust that there would be much fewer mistakes made in election returns compared with before. Concerning government's land, may I invite Mr. Ricky Chuck to take the question. Sorry, the speaker is off mic. Now, for temporary use of government's land For electioneering purposes, the candidate has to make an application with the REO, and also there would be a limitation on the usage of the switch booth. Now, during the period, the candidate will have to make an application with the lands registry related. And the lands department may have to consult other departments. So if there are more than one application at the same time, the district lands office would conduct a ballot to decide on the allocation of the site. Now, concerning urgent requests, we have consulted the lands registry, the lands departments. According to them, it would be challenging for them to approve these applications. Now, for premises within housing authority or housing society's premises, electioneering activities have to meet the requirements set out by the HA or the HS. And also, concerning the request, the tenants may have to be consulted as well. And when there are more than one request, a draw has to be conducted. Now, for relaxing the application period to 1 day before the polling day or entertaining urgent requests, according to the housing department, it is not feasible. Now, we understand because a lot of departments are involved. We have the convenience tool, I'm Smart. So with a form filled in on I'm Smart, we can save time for a lot of departments. Of course, we would seek to facilitate candidates' work, but we are also concerned about the fairness of the competition or the election. Now, very often, at the very last moment of the polling process, there may be urgent requests made by candidates to have more street booths set up. But we have to cater to other candidates' electioneering campaign as well. And also, election, of course, is a very important event, but there may be other important events or activities going on at the same time. So we need more time to consider these requests. In the previous election, we have offered flexible arrangements for some cases as well. Now, for the no canvassing area, we try to minimize the area of the no canvassing zone as much as possible so that electioneering activities can be carried out more conveniently. So we have secured a no objection letter from the lands department for candidates to conduct electioneering. So we are willing to listen to members' suggestions on how we can facilitate electioneering activities for candidates while maintaining fairness. Concerning your two questions, Chairman, how can we draw a red line for candidates and make a distinction between red lines and best practices? Now, we would brief the candidates very clearly. Whenever we say this is required by the law, that is the red line. For advice and also what we advise the candidates to do or what the candidates should do, these are best practices. So we will seek to make the guidelines and the rules clearer for better understanding of the candidates. concerning petty election expenses. We're not saying that you have to report the expenses on, say, electricity or a network fee for forwarding a message. Thank you very much. Now, Mr. Lee Chen-keung, Dr. Julius Ho, and myself, we have requested for a second round. We just need to complete the meeting by 6 p.m. Now, just very briefly, for messages sent via Facebook or WhatsApp, now maybe we should require the candidates to report the link for public inspection. Now, if we do it manually, it would be very difficult because the link would be composed of various symbols. Now, we just need to upload a link via I'm Smart. I have a colleague who had to copy the same link 1,000 times, so that is very troublesome. Same for postal letters. So if you have to file reports for 1,000 letters, that would be very troublesome. So next, Mr. Lee Chen-keung, 3 minutes. So the secretary asked us to monitor your work and give you constructive comments. So here I go. So as candidates, we all hope to win. So to secure victory, they would make use of every element possible to facilitate that. So positions for putting up banner is very important. So the positions offered by the Lands Department would prejudice candidates of a certain number. For example, if I am candidate number 3, 8 out of 10 of the banner spots assigned to me are invisible to the public. So I think candidates should be allowed to go on site to see how conspicuous their banner locations are. And also there are indirect elections. Sometimes we see that the banner positions of those indirect elections have more footfall than the direct election ones. So it's putting the cart before the horse. I'm not saying that indirect election is not fierce or tense, but I'm just saying that we should be flexible and be reasonable. Secretary. So thank you. This is a comment from the user himself. So it seems that there is a consensus on this issue. I believe the secretary has heard similar complaints before. Maybe. Never mind. We will go back and study the matter. Now, as the user, your perspective may be different from ours. So I agree with you. If the location for banners are too remote, then it would not be helpful. Now, let's say if there is a constituency on the hill, and you are giving a candidate a spot near the pavement. Well, no one would walk on the pavement on the hill. It would be better if it is on the carriage, if it is facing the carriageway. I understand that experience. We had to find locations to put up the banner for the 1210 polling date banner. Sometimes the locations are so remote that not a living soul will walk by. So I understand where you're coming from. We will look at the situation.
Thank you. So I guess they themselves have very harsh requirements for themselves as well. So let's understand where they're coming from. Last one to speak will be Dr. Junius Ho. If Paul can answer my question, I welcome his answer. What's the word I'm looking for? That is the difference between donation and market value. I understand the distinction between them. But, for example, for shops, candidates may be charged a nominal fee of $1, but then the assessment of the market value to be $4,000. Excuse me, $5,000. So is the difference going to be simple $4,999? Or is it the case that there may be a further distinction of an expense or a donation in that difference? Because for the candidate, they have really just paid $1, but then if they say that the market value is instead 4,500, then there will still be a difference of 499. So the candidate will still be breaching the rules. See, $4,999. Let me correct myself here. So with the operator, if they only charge 4,499, now the threshold is $1,000, but with it being over 1,000, 4,999, it will still be a breach of the rule. So can you be clear how it works? Well, Dr. Junius Ho is not aware of the rules, even as a lawyer. So he may be confused. So we can imagine other candidates being even more confused. Thank you. I think it is very clear. If one has paid $1 and the market value is $4,500, you have received 4,499 in donations. And if you have received donations and the value of the goods and services exceed $1,000, the candidate must issue a receipt to the donor. And after that, when declaring the election expenses, they need to include this receipt and declare the donation. So the requirements in the guidelines are very clear. This has to be declared as a donation. Well, I hope that in future we can consult Mr. Paul Tse, who has experience in elections while also being a lawyer. Thank you. Any supplementary information from the Secretary? No. Chair, let me ask a follow-up question since we're still at the point of the time being before 6. But I think that the figure, the calculation, is actually not right. In that case, why would we need to even charge? Why would we need to be charged a nominal fee of $1 in the first place? It is against reason. So even if it being $4,499, they may just say it's 4,800, and then they would say, oh no, it's actually still short, or it's $4,500 instead. So I think the administration should have a mechanism in place that as long as a declaration is made, the value should be frozen at that point in time. Of course, I may have been charged a nominal fee of $1, but then the assessment is that it is $4,000 in value, market value. So the next time I will declare that figure, but then on the next occasion it may be regarded as undervalued. In order not to have any more conflicts, can we have a mechanism in place to make sure disputes won't happen? Let me clarify something. So if you have received money exceeding $1,000, then it would be regarded as a donation, and you have to receive a receipt to the donor. With the valuation of market value, the REO will look at the justifications for saying this is not the market value. Instead, it should be a nominal value proposed by the candidate. They will listen to the justifications of the candidates, but then they will also judge with reason. Thank you. Well, I would just suggest not using the ad space. Candidates should just post street posters or consult Mr. Porter or a lawyer. Alright, last one to speak, Mr. Porter, a lawyer. Since we have time, let's explore this further. In fact, the chief executive's legal team also made a mistake, so there are often some technical details that we can iron out. For example, for maintenance, if we do not even pay a nominal fee of $1, it will just be a red flag that is bound to be investigated by the REO. And like the example that I gave about minibus windows, people won't even rent that space, but then candidates may just still be investigated. We just don't know. As for the value, it's just like with the calculation of rates. It's just about whether it is a reasonable range, and I think it is common sense. If it is too much of a difference, I think the administration won't have a problem with that. We just have to make sure the figure fits the reasonable range. I'm not claiming to be an expert, so it's just because I've made some mistakes, so I learned from them. And Dr. Junius Ho has raised this question, and I think we can discuss this a little further. Well, I thank Mr. Porter for providing free legal advice to another lawyer, Dr. Junius Ho, so that we're all clear about the arrangements. This is the end of the discussion of this agenda item. Any other business? This is the last meeting of the subcommittee. We have had 5 meetings. We discussed in detail the issues relating to elections. I hope that the administration, the various officials can do better in future. I believe our comments are very conducive to the improvement of the arrangements of the elections. We have discussed various issues relating to public elections. The Secretary will prepare a report of the subcommittee. The draft will be circulated among members when ready for their confirmation. After that, the report will be submitted to the panel on constitutional affairs. This is the end of the meeting. I thank the officials from the CMAB, REO, and ICAC for attending the meeting. I believe the things we discussed will facilitate any future candidates, the politically inclined, for their reference. And we would also say this. Back then, with the chief executive election, no mistake has been made. It is more about having a very small margin of error. So they adopted the dumbest method, but it was the most prudent method. And I believe candidates in future will have better understanding of the election arrangements, and this should be conducive to the development of democracy in Hong Kong. Thank you. Well, excuse me. For the meetings of the subcommittee, we have received valuable feedback from users, and I mean this. Through providing constructive criticism or comments in general, we could glean how we can do better even in the minor details. And with the future elections, we want to do better in the arrangements. This is our vision. And we need members to give us feedback, even if they are criticisms. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, members. Thank you. Well, we can continue to discuss related issues after the meeting. Thank you.